Emily thought her wedding day would finally bring two families together, but the truth hiding in the front row shattered everything. She believed her mother-in-law barely knew her past, but she knew every detail. And what happened when the secret surfaced stunned even Dr. Phil. Emily had always imagined her wedding day as something soft and simple. Sunlight across white chairs, the quiet hum of guests settling in, and her fiancé, Daniel, waiting with that smile he reserved only for her. And for the first few minutes, that dream felt real. She walked down the aisle, veil brushing her shoulders, every step slow and steady, the kind you take when you're finally at peace with your life. But then she saw Margaret. Margaret, her soon-to-be mother-in-law, wasn't watching the ceremony like everyone else. She wasn't smiling, wasn't even blinking. She sat stiff in the second row, both hands gripping a small, folded envelope like it was something alive, something that could escape if she loosened her fingers for even a second. That single detail hit Emily with a strange, uneasy chill. Why bring an envelope to a wedding unless it held something that mattered? And why did Margaret look like she was debating whether to hand it over or destroy it? The pastor began the opening words, but Emily's focus drifted. She watched Margaret lean forward, whispering into Daniel's ear. Not a soft greeting, not a simple "I'm so proud." It looked urgent, desperate. Daniel's face tightened, his jaw shifting the way it did when he was trying not to show emotion in public. He nodded once, then again, faster this time. The vows paused. A ripple moved across the crowd. Murmurs, shifting feet, confused glances. Emily's heart began to pound. This wasn't cold feet. This wasn't nerves. This was something else, something bigger than wedding anxiety. Something that had started long before today. She glanced down at the envelope again. The corner was bent, like someone had opened it hundreds of times, then folded it back, unable to let go. What could possibly make Margaret fall apart on the happiest day of her son's life? Daniel stepped back from the altar. He didn't look at the pastor. He didn't look at the guests. He looked only at Emily, and what she saw in his eyes wasn't fear, it was guilt. The kind of guilt that comes from holding a truth too heavy for one person. He reached for her hand, but his voice cracked before he even formed the words. "Emily, can we talk? Just for a moment. Please." The room fell completely silent. The kind of silence that makes your stomach drop because everyone can feel something unraveling. Emily's breath caught. Every instinct told her to refuse, to hold on to the ceremony, to pretend nothing was wrong. But then her eyes fell on Margaret again, pale, shaking, clutching that envelope as if her world depended on it. She nodded. Daniel led her toward a side room, just off the altar, a place usually meant for signing certificates, not stopping a wedding. As they stepped away, guests shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward, hungry for answers. Others looked away, sensing something private and fragile about to break open. Inside the small room, Emily turned to Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on?" Daniel swallowed hard. "It's about your past. My mom, she knows something. Something she should have told us earlier. Something she's been keeping for years." Emily felt herself go cold. Her past, the one part of her life she rarely talked about, the adoption, the missing pieces, the questions she never wanted to burden anyone with. Why would Margaret know anything about that? And why hide it until now? Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out the same envelope Margaret had been gripping. He held it out with shaking hands, like offering proof of something he wished wasn't real. "Emily, this changes everything." Her mind raced, already forming questions she wasn't ready to ask. What truth could ruin a wedding in seconds? What secret had been sitting in the front row, waiting for its moment to strike? She stared at the envelope as if it might open on its own. And for the first time that day, Emily felt afraid, not of marriage, not of commitment, but of the truth waiting inside a single piece of paper. 3 weeks before the wedding, Emily sat in her tiny kitchen, finishing a checklist she'd color-coded like every anxious bride. Seating chart, floral deliveries, DJ confirmations, and yes, even backup batteries for the photographer's camera. It was the one part of her life she could control, the one part that felt predictable. So when Margaret called out of nowhere and invited her over for tea, Emily froze. Margaret didn't do tea. She didn't do spontaneous. Their relationship had always been polite, respectful, but distant. They met at holidays, exchanged gifts at Christmas, and shared stiff hugs on birthdays. But never once had Margaret reached out personally, especially not alone. Emily hesitated before accepting the invitation. Something in Margaret's voice sounded different, tight, trembling, almost rehearsed. But she agreed anyway, because that's what good future daughters-in-law do. They try. The moment Emily stepped inside the house, she felt it. That strange tension humming under the air. Margaret had set out an immaculate table. Lace cloth, polished china, tiny sugar cubes stacked like building blocks. It was too perfect, too prepared. Like she was hosting a guest she desperately needed to impress or protect. They exchanged the usual small talk, but Margaret's eyes kept drifting to a folder resting beside her cup. A plain manila folder, the kind used for documents, not recipe cards. At first, Emily dismissed it, but then Margaret asked a question that didn't fit the moment at all. So, how much do you remember about your early childhood? Emily blinked. I've told you before, not a lot. I was adopted at 2. It's all fuzzy before that. Margaret nodded, but she didn't look relieved. She looked disappointed, as if she'd hoped Emily had forgotten more. Then came another question, and another, all circling the same theme: Emily's birth hospital, her adoption process, her biological mother. Emily tried to brush it off with nervous laughs, but deep down she felt a familiar ache, an old wound reopening. She'd spent her life building walls around her past, learning to live without unanswered questions. Why would Margaret dig there? Why now? The conversation grew stranger. Margaret kept saying things like, some stories are complicated, and sometimes parents make choices with heavy hearts. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. Emily felt her skin prickle. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was someone tiptoeing around a truth they didn't have the courage to speak aloud. At one point, Margaret's hand brushed the folder, and she pulled away quickly, as if burned. Emily noticed the faint writing on the tab. Yell Records. Her initials. A sharp fear flickered inside her. Was Margaret investigating her? Or worse, had she known something all along? Emily left the house that day feeling unsettled, hollow. She walked to her car with that strange folder burned into her mind. As she placed her keys into the ignition, she whispered to herself, why would she care about my adoption now? What is she afraid I'll find? That night, the unease followed her home. It clung to her thoughts like fog. And when her phone rang at 9:47 p.m., private number, she almost didn't answer. But something inside her said she should. She picked up. A woman's voice, thin and trembling, spoke a sentence that changed everything. Emily, I'm calling because it's about your biological mother. Emily froze, heartbeat thundering in her ears. Before she could respond, the woman continued. I've kept something for you for years, and you need to know the truth before you walk down that aisle. A cold chill washed over Emily. Why would a stranger say that? How did she know about the wedding? Who is this? Emily whispered. A pause. Then, my name doesn't matter, but what your mother left behind does. Emily felt the floor of her world shift. And just like that, the line went dead. She stared at her phone in the dark, every instinct telling her that her past was no longer staying in the past. Someone was watching. Someone knew things she didn't. And it wasn't just this caller. It was Margaret, too. Because sometimes the people closest to you are closest for a reason you don't see yet. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying that phone call over and over, searching for clues in every word. Who was that woman? How did she know about the wedding? And what did she mean by what your mother left behind? By sunrise, Emily made a decision. She had to meet this mysterious caller. Even if it scared her, even if it meant reopening parts of her life she'd quietly buried. The woman had left an address in a text right before disappearing again. A small, aging bungalow half an hour outside town. Peeling paint. Overgrown grass. A wind chime that sounded like it was made from old silverware. It didn't look like the home of someone who wanted to hurt her, but it absolutely looked like the home of someone who had lived too long with secrets. Emily knocked twice. The door opened almost instantly, like the woman was waiting right behind it. She was older, maybe in her late 60s. Thin, pale, with kind eyes that carried years of something heavy. Guilt, sorrow, empathy, maybe all three. She introduced herself as Claire, a retired nurse. Her hand shook as she poured Emily tea, but her voice steadied when she spoke. "I worked at St. Vincent's Hospital," she said. "I was there the day you were born." Emily felt her stomach drop. Claire reached into a wooden box on the table and took out a photo protected by a fading plastic sleeve. She pushed it gently across the table. This is why I called." Emily lifted it with trembling fingers. A newborn baby swaddled in a faded blanket. A young woman, Emily's biological mother, staring into the camera with eyes full of fear and love. And standing just a few feet behind them was Margaret, not younger by much, but unmistakably Margaret. Emily's breath left her body like she'd been punched. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "She didn't know my mother. She didn't know anything about my birth." Claire interrupted softly. "She knew. She was in the room." The room spun. Emily clutched the photo, her fingers stiffening around its edges. She had always assumed her adoption was handled by social workers, distant strangers, professionals she'd never meet. But Margaret, her future mother-in-law, in the background of the most vulnerable moment of Emily's entire existence? Why was she there? Emily asked, voice shaking. Claire looked down at her own hands. "She wasn't supposed to be. Your mother trusted her. They worked together. Your mother didn't have anyone else. And she asked Margaret to help her make the hardest decision of her life." Emily blinked, trying to make room in her head for this impossible story. "If they knew each other, why didn't Margaret tell me?" "Because she made a promise," Claire said. "A promise your mother begged her to keep. She was young, scared, alone. And Margaret agreed to guard her secret until the right time. But that time never came," Claire added. "Not even when she met you again years later." Emily stared at the photo again, her pulse pounding in her ears. Margaret standing behind her birth mother wasn't an accident. It was a connection she'd hidden for decades. A link Emily had never known existed. Then she noticed something else. There was writing on the back. Her hand shook as she turned around. For words, written in Margaret's unmistakable handwriting. "Watch over her. Always." Emily felt her chest tighten. Not from fear anymore, but from betrayal. Real, bone-deep betrayal. "How did you get this?" she whispered. Claire exhaled the kind of breath that holds years of silence. "Your mother gave it to me. She said if anything ever happened to her, someone should tell you when you were old enough to understand. I didn't know when that would be. But when I heard your name in the paper under that wedding announcement, I knew the time had come." Emily stared at Claire. "You kept this for decades. I promised your mother I would protect you," Claire said, eyes filling. "But Margaret, she made a different promise." Emily looked down at the photo again. The baby, the young mother, and Margaret standing like a shadow in the back of a life Emily never knew she had. For the first time, she realized something terrifying. Her mother-in-law hadn't just known her past. She was a part of it. Emily's hands tightened around the photo as her voice trembled. What else is she hiding? The room felt like it tilted. And deep inside, a new fear formed. Not about the past, but about what she'd do with the truth now that she finally held it. Emily drove straight to Margaret's house the next morning, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The photo sat on the passenger seat beside her, face down, as if even looking at it might ruin whatever fragile calm she had left. She wasn't angry. Not yet. What she felt was deeper, heavier, like grief mixed with realization. A truth she didn't choose, but one that chose her. When Margaret opened the door, her eyes widened. It wasn't shock. It wasn't confusion. It was the expression of someone who knew exactly why Emily was there and had been waiting for this moment for years. "Come, Margaret whispered." Emily stepped inside without sitting down, without smiling, without pretending. She placed the photo on the dining table, sliding it forward like evidence in a courtroom. Margaret looked at it only for a second before closing her eyes. "You met Claire." Emily didn't bother to hide the tremble in her voice. "You lied to me." Margaret sank slowly into a chair, shoulders collapsing. "I didn't lie," she said quietly. "I just never told the truth." Emily felt her throat tighten. "That's the same thing." Silence settled between them, thick and suffocating. Margaret finally spoke. "Your mother." She was barely 18. Scared. Alone. She had no family support. We worked together at the hospital. I was the only person she trusted. She confided in me long before you were born. She didn't want to give you up, but she didn't want you growing up in chaos either. Emily felt the words pierce her chest. "Why didn't she keep me?" Margaret folded her hands. "She wanted you to have a safe life. A stable one. So she asked me to help her find a family she could trust. A couple who could give you everything she couldn't. And you promised," Emily said bitterly. Margaret nodded. "I promised her I'd protect you. Protect your story. Protect the truth until you were ready. But when your mother died, the responsibility became mine alone. Too heavy. Too complicated. Too terrifying." Emily stared at her, breath trembling. "And when you met me again years later, when your son brought me home, you didn't think you should tell me?" Margaret's eyes filled. "I thought it was a miracle. Like you'd come full circle into my life again. I wanted to tell you 1,000 times. But I was afraid you'd think I manipulated everything. Afraid Daniel would blame me. Afraid you'd walk away." Emily shook her head, overwhelmed. "You should have trusted me with the truth." Margaret wiped a tear. "I'm not proud of what I hid. But there's more you need to know. Your mother, she didn't want your father's family to find you. She was running from them. She begged me to keep your identity protected. I kept every promise she made me swear to." Emily staggered back a step. "So this wasn't just a secret. It was a deal? An agreement?" Margaret nodded, hands trembling. "Your mother left a letter. The one you saw in an envelope today. I've opened it more times than I can admit. I was trying to find the right moment to give it to you. But then Daniel met you, fell in love with you, and suddenly the moment was gone. I was terrified the truth would ruin everything before your life even started." Emily pressed a hand to her forehead. "But Daniel knows now, doesn't he?" Margaret hesitated, then nodded again. "He overheard me talking to Claire weeks ago. I didn't know he was listening." Before Emily could process that, the front door creaked. Daniel stood in the doorway, face pale, eyes glassy. He had heard everything. "Again, Emily, I'm so sorry," he said softly. "I should have told you when I found out. I didn't want to lose you." Emily felt a deep, painful crack open inside her. "So both of you kept this from me?" Daniel took a step toward her. "I didn't think it mattered. I thought your past was your past. But when I learned my mom was involved, I panicked. I didn't know how to tell you without making everything explode." Emily backed away, tears rising. "It's not the truth that explodes things, it's the lies." Daniel looked shattered. Margaret covered her mouth with shaking hands. And Emily, caught between the two people she loved most in the world, felt herself drowning in a question she didn't want to ask but couldn't avoid. Can love survive when trust has been broken twice? She didn't know the answer, but she knew the wedding was no longer the only thing at stake. Her entire identity was. The walk from a small side room back toward the ceremony felt nothing like the walk Emily had imagined for her wedding day. There was no music, no smiles, just the hollow echo of her own footsteps and the weight of two truths she never asked for. The truth Margaret hid for decades, and the truth Daniel chose to keep only weeks before the wedding. It felt like the ground beneath her was shifting with every step. Daniel followed behind her quietly, as if afraid one wrong word might shatter whatever fragile thread connected them. Margaret trailed even farther back, clutching the envelope again, the same one that had sparked whispers, questions, and a full stop in the ceremony. It looked heavier now, as though everything she had carried for years was sealed inside it. In the quiet of the small bridal prep room, Emily stopped and turned. "Give it to me," she said softly. Margaret swallowed hard and placed the envelope in Emily's hands. It was worn, bent at the corners, the paper soft from being opened and closed too many times. Emily slid a thumb under the seal, feeling a strange mix of fear and longing. Longing for answers, longing for closure, longing for something that finally felt like truth. She opened it. Inside was a single, carefully folded letter. Yellow by time, ink slightly faded. But the handwriting was careful, steady, a young woman trying to be strong even as she was breaking. At the top, in delicate cursive, were the words, "To the family who will one day love my daughter." Emily felt tears blur her vision. The letter was full of emotion. Her biological mother describing the fear she had felt, the love she carried, the certainty that Emily deserved a life better than the chaos she was born into. She wrote about Margaret too, about trusting her more than anyone else, about asking her to protect the baby until a safe home could be found. And at the end, in handwriting that wavered slightly, Emily's mother wrote, "Please tell her I loved her, even if I couldn't stay." Emily's breath caught on the last line. Her biological mother hadn't abandoned her. She had shielded her. And Margaret hadn't been a villain. She had been the last person her mother trusted to carry a truth too heavy for an 18-year-old girl to bear. Emily wiped her eyes, reading the letter again and again, feeling both heartbreak and unexpected comfort. The room was so quiet she could hear her own pulse. Finally, she looked up at Margaret. "Why today?" Emily asked. "Why wait until the ceremony to give me this?" Margaret's shoulders shook. "Because I knew if I didn't do it now, I never would. And you deserve to walk down that aisle knowing the truth about where you came from, not the version I protected out of fear." Emily closed her eyes. It wasn't enough to erase the hurt, but it was enough to understand it. Daniel stepped forward, voice trembling. "Emily, I didn't hide this because I doubted us. I hid it because I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared of losing you, scared of hurting you, scared of everything." Emily studied his face. The guilt, the fear, the love. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the secrets themselves or the fact that they were all meant to protect her. She looked down at the letter again, her mother's words echoing through her mind. "Don't fear the truth." Emily opened the door that led back to the ceremony. The murmurs grew louder. Guests turned, confused, concerned. Emily took a breath, and then, instead of stepping toward the altar, she stepped to the front of the room, letter in hand, eyes steady. The entire audience fell silent. "This wedding," she said, voice trembling but strong, "isn't paused because of cold feet. It's paused because today I learned the truth about where I come from and about who stood by me, even in silence." Gasps rippled across the rows. Emily's eyes watered, but her voice didn't break. "I'm not calling off this wedding, but I'm not walking down this aisle pretending everything is perfect. I'm walking down knowing exactly who I am." Her hand closed around the letter, her mother's voice, her story. Then she turned toward Daniel. But the moment that followed wasn't what anyone expected. Daniel stepped forward first, not with the confident stride of a groom waiting for vows, but with the slow, trembling steps of a man terrified of losing the one person he couldn't imagine his life without. His expression wasn't defensive or angry. It was raw, stripped down to fear and remorse. Emily held his gaze. For the first time since the ceremony halted, she wasn't overwhelmed by shock or betrayal. She was overwhelmed by choices. Choices her mother had made, choices Margaret had carried, choices Daniel had fumbled, and choices she now had to make herself. Daniel reached out gently, stopping just inches from her. "Emily, I know an apology doesn't fix years of secrets," he said, voice shaking. "But if you still want to walk this path with me, I want to start it with the truth." Emily studied him, his voice, his eyes, his fear, his love. And then she realized something. The truth had hurt her, yes, but it had also freed her. Freed her from assumptions. Freed her from silence. Freed her from the idea that her past was some mystery locked away in dusty records. Now, her story had a voice. Her mother's, Claire's, even Margaret's. She looked out at the guests, confused, emotional, but patient, waiting, hoping this wasn't the end, but a turning point. Emily took a deep breath. "Daniel," she said softly, "we can't start a marriage on secrets, but we can start one on honesty." Daniel broke, not dramatically, not loudly, but in a quiet exhale, the kind you release when the weight you've been carrying finally falls to the ground. Margaret, still near the aisle, clasped her hands together, tears streaming freely now. She looked small, humbled, fragile. Not the guarded woman Emily had known for years, but a human being who had spent decades protecting a secret she never asked for. Emily turned to her. "Margaret," she said, her voice steady but emotional, "you kept her words safe. You shouldn't have kept them from me, but you kept them safe. And I can't ignore that." Margaret nodded, lips trembling. "I wanted to give you the truth. I just didn't know how to do it without losing you." Emily's expression softened, not fully forgiving yet, not fully trusting yet, but opening. A small crack in a thick wall. Then, with the letter still in her hand, she took Daniel's arm. "I'm ready," she whispered. The pastor, stunned but composed, stepped back into position. The guests straightened, holding their breath. The music didn't restart. It didn't need to. The silence carried more meaning than any song ever could. Emily and Daniel walked down the aisle together, slower than before, each step a mix of pain, healing, and something new, courage. When they faced each other at the altar, there were no rehearsed vows, no polished speeches, just two people promising honesty. "I don't have perfect words," Daniel said softly, "but I promise to tell the truth, even when it scares me." Emily felt tears roll down her cheeks. "And I promise not to fear the past anymore." Their kiss wasn't the big, cinematic one guests expected at weddings. It was gentle, human, real. When the ceremony ended, people hugged them with watery smiles. Some wiped their own tears. Others whispered, "This is the strongest start a marriage could have." Outside, under the soft afternoon light, Emily found Margaret waiting beside a garden path. Not hovering, not interfering, just waiting, like someone who hoped for a chance but wasn't entitled to it. Emily approached her slowly, the letter from her mother tucked safely in her hand. "Would you walk with me?" Emily asked quietly. Margaret looked stunned, grateful, relieved. They walked together, not speaking at first, just breathing the same air, stepping in the same direction for the first time in years. Finally, Emily stopped in front of her mother's grave, a simple stone, clean but unadorned. She hadn't visited it in years, partly because she had never known what to say, and partly because she had never known the full story. Margaret stood beside her. Two women connected not by blood, not by legality, but by a promise made decades ago in a hospital room. A promise that had shaped both their lives in ways they were only now beginning to understand. Emily placed the letter gently at the base of the stone. "Mom," she whispered, "I know now. I know everything." Margaret's hand, trembling, rested respectfully on Emily's shoulder. Losing trust had broken the beginning of this wedding day. But choosing honesty was starting to rebuild everything. And for the first time, Emily wondered, which bonds matter more? The ones we're born with, or the ones we choose to repair? Family stories are rarely simple. Sometimes we uncover truths that hurt, heal, or reshape who we thought we were. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need courage today. And join us for more real, human stories about truth, forgiveness, and second chances.